I'm Jim Middleton, and welcome to Flying by the Seat of My Paints. This is the Entrepreneur Podcast, or Artrepreneur Podcast, designed for the artist who, like many of us, wants to translate their passion into a paycheck. The tips and tricks myself and upcoming guests have learned along the way are what we want to share to help you get that one step closer with topics like how to promote, how to price, how to show your art, how to become a better artist yourself. For this, our 6th episode, I'm back recording both the audio and video, so this will be up on your favorite podcast providers and on YouTube for Friday. I've struggled a bit figuring out how to capture my guests when they're on with video as well as the audio. So that'll be something for me to tackle with future guests. I want to make sure that we have both available. So episode 5 does not have a video. You'll be able to listen to that, though, anytime you'd like. It's up there now. It was actually a really good episode. And for this episode, there was a kernel of thought that came through in my last podcast with my friend Alison Vino when we talked about creativity and finding your voice. It actually kind of brought about my thoughts for this episode. It's inspiration, and a major source for me. There's one that was always been a go-to that I talk about all the time. And I'm really not even going to dive that deep into it today. We're going to talk about inspiration. Art parents are kind of where my inspirations always come from, but art parents is kind of such a huge topic. I think I'm going to do a separate episode just on art parents. Art parents are basically artists whose style, material, subject matter inspire us. You'll see many people, things like, for example, I'm trying to think, isn't that horrible? Vincent van Gogh was very much inspired by a friend and fellow painter of the day, Claude Monet, who was delving into Impressionism, and that kind of bled into his work. We're going to spend some time on art parents, but today I just wanted to focus on inspiration. And there's a major one for myself that I go back to a lot. There's one that I think is readily available to a lot of people. And then there was another one that Alison mentioned when we talked that I thought it was really well worth diving into inspiration as a topic as a whole. So I'm going to skip my usual What's Flying This Week segment, dive right into inspiration, because in all honesty, I'm in a bit of a creative roadblock, which is why I think inspiration is very timely for me to talk about. I'm stuck because I have a commission that's about 95% done, has been 85 to 90% done for almost a month now, which is a ridiculously long amount of time for me. Normally I'm done and I move on, but this one is of a personal nature, so there's this extra pressure on myself to feel like I've got it exactly right. And because of that, I can't seem to move past it. As long as it's sitting there, I mean, I've even tried. I had another project in mind that I thought I could spend a little time working on, and I started mapping it out and started working on it, and I just kept going back mentally to what I have left. So I need to push through that this week, and because that's how my brain works. Everybody's brain works a little bit differently. Some people are perfectly comfortable jumping around through multiple pieces of work and it doesn't affect them, and it might very much be just the nature of this individual piece that I'm working on that has me stuck a little bit, but we'll get past it and we'll keep moving on. So what I want to focus on today is, what inspires, what are some key places for you to draw inspiration, some suggestions you may not have thought of, and I really hope that it's a topic today that'll be of value for you. So first and foremost, I want to talk about drawing from life, and I don't necessarily mean sitting down and drawing something from life. I mean, when it comes to inspiration, this is the one we're the most familiar with. It's the most personal to us all, the world around us, be it nature, music, movies, people, any little part of the world you can possibly think of. We have things that speak to us every day. I've always lived by the belief that any good art makes you feel something. And inspiration, first and foremost, are those things around you that can make you feel something. So maybe it's a quiet view from your favorite place or location. Maybe it's the sound of your kids laughing. It can be a memory that means something to you. I did a painting, and you'll see it scroll by here in my, if you're watching the video version, I have some pieces of art that are referencing there. The one that's up now with the rooster and the lightning storm, it's called Omen, actually inspired from a nightmare that I had when I was 10 that I wanted to get out. It can literally be anything. And you'll be surprised to find some of the ways inspiration affected things that you see all the time. Did you know that the curve on the front wheel of an 80s Corvette was actually based on the designer's vision of a woman laying on her side and the way her hip went? He wanted to translate that into the car. Did you know the little aliens in Space Invaders were inspired by crabs and squid and octopi, things that were common seafood items in Japan where the game was made? Did you know Batman was a combination of Sherlock Holmes, Zorro, and a Leonardo da Vinci sketch of a bat-winged flying machine? The ornate carvings, if you're familiar with Rosalind Chapel in Scotland, which has a whole crazy history around it, but there are these little ornate carvings that they didn't realize until, not long ago, that they're actually tympanic symbols. So what that means is they're shapes made by sound waves. So it's amazing where, all of these different, where the strange places that inspiration that can come from that moves people to make them want to create. And in the art world, absolutely as well. Picasso's Cubism was inspired from his exposure to a broad range of African traditional art. He definitely, created Cubism, but it's not from nothing. It was built off inspiration from other pieces of artwork. Expose yourself to a lot. It may feel like, you're wasting time if you're watching The Umbrella Academy on Netflix, but there can be all kinds of cool ideas or things you hadn't thought of, or music you're listening to while you're tidying up your space. Anything you can find that can potentially, hit a little spark off, something that, moves you emotionally, makes you feel something, whether it's hair standing up on the back of your neck, or, why I just got the image of the Grinch's heart growing 3 sizes. But when those moments strike, make sure you capture them. You can't always immediately, depending on what your medium is, going to your potter's wheel or going to an easel to paint. You might not even have a sketchbook on you. But you should capture those moments of inspiration when they strike. Use your phone, take audio notes, or type in some notes in the notepad section. Write them down or save them in a book. I try to carry a notebook on me all the time, which is actually full. I have ideas for paintings and art series and things that I want to create. Keep vision folders on your phone or on your computer to save if you see an image that I've kind of moved past the stage of just seeing something cool, wanting to paint something cool, but I can often see images that make me think of other things I'd like to do. So grabbing those images, putting them together in a folder. There's a comic book artist who recently did a series, Jason Fabok. I'm 90% sure, and I hope that I've gotten the right artist here. But he did a series, no, I'm not sure if Jason Fabok did a lot of, he did paintings and some really cool drawings of Swamp Thing, who's one of my favorites, but I want to make sure I've got the right artist, so I don't think this is Jason, but there was an artist recently who did a series of Mary Jane, Spider-Man's longtime girlfriend, where he had her in the 70s, in the 80s, in the 90s, 2000s. And what he did was, rather than just style Mary Jane after an individual image, he took a lot of images from that era to give him the idea and the inspiration for what he wanted to create. So he had vision boards of things from the 70s, Farrah with her big hair, and bell bottoms, and different clothing designs and colors that were popular in the era, and the same thing with the 80s and with each era. So he used all these sources of inspiration to move towards a single point. And if you capture these things that inspire you when you inspire them, or when they inspire you, then you have them to go back to. If you have an idea, you have a project you want to work on, you can go back to that source. Most people, I think, are familiar with the drawing from life method of inspiration because it's around us all the time. but it's taking it to the next step where you actually put it together into something that I think you want to make sure that you're saving them, and you want to make sure that you have them when you're ready to create. Now, the point that was brought up by Allison in our last podcast, which I really, really loved, was exploring new materials. And it's crazy to me to think that I missed this on the last pod and didn't necessarily think about it, because it was exploring new materials that really changed my life. So I spent most of my life drawing with pencil and ink. I dabbled a little bit in digital work on PC with a Wacom tablet back in the early days of Photoshop. What changed my life, though, was acrylic paint. Something about painting and having color available to me, and that it was a fast drying medium, that I could finish a section, immediately work over it, and move on. I didn't have to worry about, at the time, understanding, if I was going to blend, I needed to do it quickly. And it also lent itself well to my whole 100 paintings in 100 days challenge. So, art had sat for me. But with painting, it turned on something from my brain. Some people, like my friend Allison, work in multiple types of medium, in individual works of art. So you'll see inks and paints and resin, and I know there are other things that are in there, and I would definitely go check out Allison Vino's site, Allison Vino Art Studios. You can see lots of her work, and she'll definitely tell you about her process and some of the things that she has in there, because I don't want to misspeak any of the things she has in that she might not necessarily use. But exposure to these mediums can potentially open up something for you that you may not have considered. When I fell into painting, it was all because somebody asked me to fill into for an art battle 2 days before the event when I'd never painted. Have you ever heard of the theory of loss aversion? We don't like to lose. You know what I mean? They've actually found, I've been in sales for a big part of my life, they can compensate you for things. So they've actually found that saying, there's a commission you can earn is very different than saying, you have $1,000, if you want to keep it, you need to do this, right? Or there's a really great video on YouTube. I talked about it in the last podcast. I think it's called 7 Habits of Highly Effective Artists, or Habits of Highly Effective Artists. It's a really good video where he talked about how he made a bet with his cousin that he could get X amount of likes on ArtStation in a set amount of time, and if he didn't, he would owe his cousin $1,000. So there was a loss there. For me, with the art battle and painting, the loss was the loss of ego, I didn't want to look stupid, right? I didn't want to look. It was funny, back at that time, I really had a very narrow view of art, and I think that narrow view made me feel like I had to have a similar style or level of what I thought was being adept at the time with my painting or with my drawing. I needed to kind of try to match it with painting. So that fear actually made me look up a process video of somebody painting. I didn't know the process video was actually an oil painter, and I was using acrylics, but I just followed his time lapse and used the same techniques and practiced for a few days. Then there was also the fact that the art battle wouldn't let me have a reference, so I couldn't look at a picture when I was painting. It all had to be out of my head, so that meant I needed to figure out something I could recreate. So I took the time to think of a design I liked and then map it out into grids. So, okay, if this is always half, this is, where would I start? How would I always create the image over and over? And it made me practice. It made me, even though I only had 2 days, it made me dive into the medium at a level that I probably never would have normally. And it made me practice. It made me, work to actually not look stupid at this event, as shallow as that may seem. That was my goal at the time. But having that loss aversion and having those new materials that I'd never tried, it didn't just give me an inspirational spark. It soaked the kindling in gasoline and created a raging bonfire. Maybe you're still searching for your spark. Maybe you already have a raging bonfire. Or maybe you had a raging bonfire and it's down to embers and coals and you kind of need to re-stoke that fire. Seriously spending some time on some new materials, actually trying to learn them, actually trying to get better, and it depends on the materials. You don't know what's going to excite you. I did some time with sea glass sculpture. I really enjoyed it. I haven't gone back to it. I did watercolor around the same time I did acrylics. I like watercolors, but it didn't light the same fire that acrylics did. So explore some mediums, find the things that light your fire, and go after it. So you've got inspirations from life, you have inspirations from new materials. How do you tie it together into something unique? For me, one of the things that can really help with that is a prompt. So when I say prompts, these are literally just terms to get you thinking about something with art. The first time I was exposed to prompts were Inktober. So Inktober is coming up next month. If you're following Inktober, there is some whole drama around stuff going on there. I'm not too worried about that in the sidelines. I mean, that's all about the creator. I think Inktober is more about the act in and of itself. So for me, I'm still excited about Inktober. And it doesn't have to be Inktober. Whatever month you happen to be listening to this, there are art challenges almost every single month that are out there. You don't have to do a month. You could do a certain number of days, find a challenge that excites you, and then you find something with prompts. So with Inktober, it's a 30-day exercise where you're creating art every day in October. For me, the first time I tried it was 2017, so it was actually before I found painting. And at the time, I didn't use any prompts at all. I literally just made artwork based on horror films, because I've always been a big horror film nut. It's October, Halloween, feels good, let's do it. But in the following years, I would take a theme. So we're using a medium I don't use, I was very familiar with, but compared to painting now, I very rarely do pencil and ink, which I need to get back to more, considering it was the base of where my art started. But so I have a medium, pen and ink. I would pick a theme for myself. So one year I did superheroes. Another year I did witches. This year I'm going to do cryptids. If you're not familiar with cryptids, or the term cryptids, we're talking about cryptozoological creatures. So these are creatures that are most likely myths and legends, like Nessie or Bigfoot or Chupacabra, but have little hints of purported evidence that suggest they may be yet undiscovered creatures. I've always loved that stuff since the time I was a kid. It's something that I have fun with my girls, watching shows like Destination Truth or his new version, Expedition X. Loved all the books. I loved all the kind of weird, is it real, is it not real kind of vibe. So this year I'm going to take the prompts and apply them to cryptids. So it's like building a puzzle in your head. So I found the prompt list, and again, you can Google any art prompt list. You can use the actual official Inktober prompt list. You can find any other ones that you like and then apply it. So by mixing these things together, there's something about coming up with a puzzle that I think is fun in your brain, and it can really excite you on the concept, or really fuel your inspiration. So one of my favorite images I did in Inktober last year, I'm going to go through this. So the one that's up right now, that's actually a tattoo model that I'm a fan of, Angela Manzotti. I was doing superheroes. The theme for the day, I think, was poisonous. So I decided to do a take on Poison Ivy, who's a Batman villain. Use Angela Manzotti as a reference because I like the idea of her being covered with, villain-themed and Batman-themed tattoos that kind of tied to the whole kind of concept, and it made me want to create something interesting for myself. So that's how I mixed things together. Now, last year I did an image. The prompt, I decided to do witches for the entire Inktober as my main theme, and then I had a prompt for husky, and that was kind of, I didn't want to go with, being a big guy most of my life. The term husky has always meant just one thing, but with the theme of witches, my brain actually built this entire story of a witch that was attacked and dying. She used a spell to save her consciousness because her body was going to be gone. So she reached out to find a physical form to inhabit, like a golem, some other kind of thing that she could put her essence into. And she felt something husky, which in the story in my mind was a scarecrow stuffed with corn husks. So that exercise of mixing a prompt with a theme and new materials got me really excited, and it created the image you can see up on the screen if you're on YouTube now, with the scarecrow kind of blowing in the wind and the single eye lit up. So as this witch's consciousness has taken over the form, I was really happy with the image that came out of that story, and it wouldn't have happened without the addition of prompts. So I really recommend, if you're looking for another source of inspiration, to consider prompts as well as another way to kind of fuel your inspiration. Lastly, don't forget this is about you. To hammer on my witch metaphor, make sure you're brewing a perfect potion of inspiration that applies specifically to you. Listen to how you feel about the idea. Recently, I came up with an idea for a unique art presentation subject, a format I've never done before, that would be really cool, that I felt would be really broadly would be appealing to people. Once I started doing it and mapping it out, I wasn't remotely excited to see it come together. And that, because I was meh, I had clearly come up with an idea that maybe it's a great idea, but at this time my inspiration level for it is way too low. Yeah. Compare that to the witch possessed scarecrow idea that I just told you about, and I think even talking about them, you can hear the difference in excitement in my voice. I couldn't wait to get that on paper, and I think a great idea for Inktober for a lot of people is, especially if they don't often work in ink, they have the limitations of the medium. I mean, you're basically working with black and white and gradations. It has set prompts, or like I said, find alternative prompts if you want. There are all kinds of themes out there. But if there's no excitement in the process, even though I think Inktober is a great idea, if it doesn't excite you, then you're not going to get anything out of it, right? It really needs to be, if it just feels like work and not fun and you're not excited to see the results, then you're going down the wrong path. It's not going to give you the results you need. Find the combination that makes you feel like you have to get it out because you can't wait to see it. And that scarecrow, I couldn't wait to see it because the idea in my head, was really exciting to me. And that's what you need to do to get your cup of inspiration. So let's summarize. Draw from what moves your heart, from anything in your life and around you. Again, what I said: music, movies, family, scenery, your pet. It can be anything, but it should be something that moves you. Try new materials, see what excites you. Use prompts to make your mind stretch to new places. Tailor things that will be an inspiration for you. Results will always tell you if you're on the right path. And you know what? I'd love to see what you create. If you'd like to share any of your work, I think we're going to offer that as a service too with the pod. I have questions that are open. We're still in early days here, guys. So I know we have regular listeners, and maybe they don't have anything they want to ask, but maybe they're artists who'd like to share their work. I am a lifelong artist myself. I think my depth of appreciation for all kinds of art has really stretched. I'd love to see any pieces that you might like to share, any questions you might like that you might have about the piece, or share what you love about the piece. Tell me what inspired you to get there. Tell me why you had to get it out. Or if you feel like there's something that just isn't sitting right with you. It might just take a different pair of eyes, and whether it's mine or one of the guests we have on, we'd be happy to give you some feedback. So thanks so much for listening. If you have questions, or like I said, if you wanted to submit artwork for feedback to myself or my guests, you can click the message link in the Anchor podcast main page, or send us an email at flyingbytheseatofmypaints, FLYINGBYTHESEATOFMYPAINTS @gmail.com. Yes, I know it's a ridiculously long email. It's not changing. Flyingbytheseatofmypaints @gmail.com. If you think you have some good advice here on the pod, take a moment to subscribe. Rate us on your platform. That'll help us get shared around so more people who can find us, and hey, maybe recommend us to a fellow artist friend who's thinking about making the leap and wants to help turn that passion into a paycheck. I hope we can help. Until next time, this is Jim Middleton. Just keep creating.